the next concept is attitudes. So what is attitude, or what are attitudes? The notion of attitudes is actually central to studies in social sciences, with the relevance of the topic located within the connection between attitudes and action. The earliest attempts to define attitudes can be dated back to 1930s, starting with Thurston's definition of attitudes, stating that it is the effect for or against a psychological object. This definition sees attitudes as a psychological construct and focuses more on the internal state of an individual. And the early definitions of attitude appear to view attitudes as an internal state, most of them. For instance, Approch does not only define what attitudes are, with the assertion that attitude is a mental and neural state of readiness organized through experience, exerting a directive and dynamic influence upon the individual's response to all objects with which it is related. And he also explains the functions of attitudes, which is to determine for each individual what he see and hear, what he will think, and what he will do. So here we can see the early attempt to define attitude was more about the internal state of a person, like through experience, and it would give you an idea whether you're going for or against a certain psychological object, if it makes sense. And later, here is a model of attitude, a three-component model of attitudes, which was proposed by Rosenberg and Hofland in the 1960s. And they argue that an attitude is formed with three components: affect, cognition, and behavior. The affective component is understood to be the emotional part of an attitude, forming positive and negative feelings. The cognitive component refers to the beliefs associated with the object and can often be related to the individual's stereotyping. And the behavioral component refers to the individual's behavior or behavioral response or action towards an object. So in this case, a positive attitude is formed when an individual's emotions, beliefs, and behaviors towards an object are positive. And a negative attitude is formed when the individual's emotions, beliefs, and behaviors towards an object are negative. So in this, well, the main idea is that in this model of attitude is that, okay, so affect, cognition, and behaviors contribute to the identity. So that's, yeah, so that's one direction. What do you think about this model? Do you think that's any good, or is it perfect, or does it make sense? Yeah. Any thoughts on this, or are you clear about this model? Yeah. 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 I can see someone raising hand. How do I? Yeah.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah.
This is Dina Abu Zaid, PhD candidate at Alexandria University. Nice to see you.
Yeah, sure.
I would really comment on this model, as I can see that we have several attitudes towards the language, in the sense that they show us the salient interactions that people have towards the language.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if these components are there to show us the attitudes, so we might see the various linguistic features, okay, in the message recipients' beliefs, and we get to evaluate them regarding the message senders and the beliefs and evaluations that are most likely to affect the receiver's behaviors towards the senders in different contexts.
Yeah, I think what you're trying to say was that so the speakers actually have a part to play in this, right? If I understand correctly.
Excuse me?
Yeah, what you were trying to say was that the speakers actually would be able to affect how the listener perceive. Is that what you're trying to say? Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's true, because
Let me put it another way, if it wasn't clear for you. we infer about the people from the way they talk. Okay, so people have attitudes, feelings, beliefs about language in general, and their language, and the language, they infer about the language of other people. So attitudes are really demonstrated through the actual behavior. Okay, and then they reflect about feelings, beliefs, culture, identity in different contexts.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I think for us to reflect attitudes, it's usually by behaviors, you know. Yeah, I think that makes sense. That's a very good
so
comment.
it's really perfect for me to see this model, because it combines emotional, cognitive, I couldn't see the last
And behavior.
Behavior.
So it's three things.
Yeah.
Attitudes are, well, according to this model, attitudes are composed of affect, cognition, and behaviors.
Yeah, it's a combination of everything for each and every person, whether it's a sender or a receiver. Okay, we get to infer all these things all together.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your thoughts. Anyone else? Anyone else has any ideas?
Yeah, I have just one comment about the model. I like the behavioral component, the last one, because I mean, it's a very essential component. If you have an attitude and you don't act, then it's an incomplete attitude, regardless of how you're going to act. Is it positive or negative or so on?
Yeah.
But I think it's quite logical for me. It makes sense. So yeah, I like it.
So basically, it went one step forward from the previous definitions of attitude, because the previous ones were more about like psychological thoughts, like just how a person would think, and yeah, which might direct to the behavior, but then it didn't say so back then, in the earliest attempts to attitudes. So yeah, so in general, it's well perceived here, this model. Yeah, that's good. And okay, we'll move on then. I guess. Let me see. Okay. So, now we look at the other, well, a slightly edited version of this model, because some scholars claim it's not that perfect, with the main drawbacks of it being the assumption it's one direction from the three components to attitudes, and the assumption that attitudes are purely comprised of the three components. So it doesn't take into account that attitudes can also influence the affective, cognitive, and behavioral responses, which can then change the individual's perception of the social world, from which further attitudes are formed. What it means is that people argue that the existing attitudes can also affect the affective, cognitive, and behavioral responses. So it's not just the one direction. Okay, affect, cognition, and behaviors contribute to attitudes, but attitudes can also influence three components. Here we're introducing the Factious object evaluation model of attitude. So it suggests that the relationship between attitudes and the three components, affect, cognition, and behaviors, are bidirectional, as opposed to being unidirectional. So according to what he said, attitudes are seen as object evaluation associations in memory, while still focusing on the idea of affect, cognition, and behaviors. The model theorizes that these all can be, on the one hand, the basis from which attitudes are formed, and on the other hand, the responses influenced by attitudes, and then attitudes are not hypothetical and can exist as a form of evaluative knowledge, which can influence the affective, cognitive, and behavioral responses of an individual. And the model also proposes that the association between the summary evaluation and the object can vary in strength which is then a factor of the accessibility of the evaluative knowledge from memory. So in other words, whether attitudes can be activated as a form of evaluative knowledge to guide one's affect, cognition, and behavior depends on the strength of the attitudes. So, so the idea of this sort of new model is that it still focuses on affect, cognition, and behaviors, but the main difference is that it suggests that attitude can also affect the three components that we've discussed before, because attitudes can exist as a form of evaluative knowledge and can exist in memory. So what do you think about these two models of attitudes? Which one do you think make more sense? What's your thoughts on these? Is it an improvement, or is it is it just too much, or what's your thought?
Okay, I totally agree that attitude would be a result of cognitive behavior as well. It's the only way to evaluate it. It's like, I don't know how else they would evaluate.
What do you mean is how would affect, cognition, and behaviors be, how would they contribute to attitudes?
Yeah, how they would be evaluated except with attitude.
It's actually quite an abstract concept, I would guess, actually, I think. But usually when we talk about attitudes, well, what I feel is that whether we like a thing or not, and there's affective component, and the cognitive part is whether we believe in it, whether we and it can be related to how we stereotype something, and then how we react to it, that's the behaviors. So according to the previous model, I think that's how it worked out. So they think, okay, these three things, so there's these three reactions that you see contribute to your identity, your attitude, like whether it's positive or negative. That's basically what it was trying to suggest. That's how I see it. But the question now is whether these three components, whether attitudes can exist as an evaluative knowledge and can affect these three components, I think. If it makes sense. Does it make sense?
Okay, can I add something?
Yeah.
Hi, Rania. I would really add to your question about testing these components. I think testing here shouldn't fall under some hypotheses, but it should fall under some kind of observations, interviewing people just to test how their attitudes are towards language varieties or language in general. So I cannot have a question and I simply put a theoretical answer for it concerning attitudes, but I should go for more practical kind of research, in the sense that I get to see people, I get to interview them, ask them direct questions, have some questionnaires. I don't know.
Yeah.
This is my thought about it.
There are.
Just to make it relevant to the model.
And we'll talk about it later on. And there are usually three ways of finding language attitudes in research, and we'll talk about it. And it's more like theory based just now. I think it's more like about the concepts of what attitudes are just now. So, but then we'll move on to something more practical after. If it makes sense. Any other thoughts? Any other thoughts? If not, then we'll move on to language attitudes. Then 1 second. Okay, so language attitudes, that's a crucial concept. So language, according to Cargiles and Ryan and Braddock, is a powerful social force that does more than to convey intended referential information. And it suggests the inseparable link between languages and social factors. Therefore, it is generally agreed that the study of language attitudes should not be limited to the attitudes towards the certain languages themselves, but also the language-related objects such as speakers, accents or language varieties, and the nation perhaps as well. Baker describes language attitude as an umbrella term, as it includes attitudes towards varieties and dialects and speakers of the language, language learning, and all the other language-related behaviors. In this context, I'm the most familiar with the Hong Kong situation, so I'm going to put it into the Hong Kong context here. The notion of language attitude directly relates to, in Hong Kong, there was a protest in 2019, namely the extradition bill protest, and people were protesting against one bill imposed by the Chinese government. And I could see that since the protest, there have been more negative voices about Mandarin and the speaker of Cantonese with a Mandarin accent, because Mandarin is more related to the mainland China. And that's why since the protest, there have been like online bullying of Mandarin speakers as well in Hong Kong. So in this case, I think language attitude is pretty much related not only to the language itself, but also the language variety and its speakers. What do you think? How is it in your country or in the places where you're from? Does it have the same sort of phenomenon? Or yeah, anyone has any thought about it? Yeah, how are the languages in Egypt, for example? What are the language attitudes in Egypt? Are they like, do they, yeah.
Yes, I like the part that the definition that language attitude is a powerful social force because it connects the third component of behavior to the whole model of attitude. And in Egypt, we don't have like this war between languages because we have the official one, Arabic, and for example, English as a second language and so on. But language attitudes are more prevalent or more apparent when it comes to dialects. Mm-hmm, the dialects, we have so many dialects in Egypt, the southern ones and those from northern Egypt and so on. Mm-hmm. So for example, if you are going to an interview and you speak in a certain dialect, yes, attitude can be very apparent here and you may like lose the job. Of course, it's not something general, but it happens. So yeah, it's more of attitudes towards dialects here in Egypt. Different languages.
As we mentioned before, it's more like an umbrella term. It's not just about the language itself, but it's also about every language related objects.
Every language variety, yes, exactly.
Yeah, variety as well, dialect, accent, speakers as well, everything. Okay, I can see a few hands up. Maya or Maya, can you?
Yeah. Maya.
Maya, okay.
Yes, hello.
Yeah, hello.
I do agree with Wissam. There's a huge emphasis on what kind of regional dialect you speak, even if it's in Arabic, in interviews and such. And I can see that evidently in my working context. And I'm an English teacher, and you get lots of ads, schools in particular, asking for native speaking teachers or non-natives, but with a certain accent. There's a high preference. Mm-hmm. It's sort of put on a pedestal to have a British accent for some reason. It does create tension. There's this catfight right now between the fact that you're a non-native speaker or you're a native speaker or a non-native with a certain accent. And it does create a bit of a stir and problems in hiring and it's an overall issue, and you can see lots of parents in schools and the people who work in schools can attest to that. The idea that the parents put special emphasis on the fact that they want their kids to speak with a certain accent, and when the teachers have that accent or that dialect. And even in Arabic, I mean, we speak colloquial Arabic in Egypt, but there's preference also for certain dialects over others. So there's this sort of I don't know how to put it, but there's a mold for you to act a certain way and certainly to speak in a certain way right now.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah, it's exactly true. I think in most places, I mean, for most languages, there are different dialects, and people perceive them differently as well. When I was in Scotland, in Scotland we've got like a few. Well, we've got the Scottish, because I was studying in Scotland for a few years, and then I heard a lot of like Scottish English, and I think, for example, for English, Scottish English is perceived the most friendly accent in Scotland, and if you speak with a standard sort of like received pronunciation in Scotland, probably people don't really think that you're a very friendly person in the first thought. Well, that's from my experience back then. But from where I grew up in Hong Kong, people don't like English, for example, in Chinese accent as well. So they try to train their kids to hopefully speak more like in an American accent, perhaps. That's why. But then in Hong Kong, it's slightly different because we don't really use English outside classroom or education system. So we would, if we were to learn how to speak in a certain way, we would only just be able to pick up a few features, but then we could not quite make a connected speech that fluently. So so that contributed to another sort of Hong Kong English. But yeah, I do agree with your idea that usually it's, I mean, for quite a lot of like places or countries, it's more about attitudes towards the language varieties than the languages themselves as well. Yeah. So I can see three hands up. Yomna, am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
Yomna. Yes.
Yomna, yeah.
Yeah, so yes, concerning the language attitudes, I just want to second Mayar as well in this part, because sometimes the way you pronounce English in Egypt even can reflect your social background, your social class, and your educational background. So here people are categorized based on their pronunciation. If they pronounce they have an accent, or they pronounce English properly, or they have mother tongue interference. So this or these aspects actually reflect your social category, or social and educational background.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, yeah, I think it makes sense sometimes, yeah, because that's sort of the attitude anyway. I think that's the attitude towards a certain accent or a certain variety. Again, yeah, yeah. Again, I think it's happening in most, or many places for many languages as well. But English is probably the most noticeable one, because I think most countries would, well, I mean, most people, I mean, just English is a very like a global language, let's put it that way. So I think it would be quite easy to recognize how people perceive different English accents, I think, if it makes sense. Okay. The next one, is that Reem? Is that, I can see that.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Hi, Professor. Actually, I totally agree with my colleagues here. What I want to add is the diction, the choice of words.
Yeah.
Actually, the people, when they choose certain words instead of others, so the people can judge them and change their attitudes toward them, even in Arabic. So I think my friends will relate. For example, people who we have different variety of the plural of trousers. So when we say pantalon, it's different from pantalon, it's different from banati. So I think you will relate. Okay, so those people, when they say this, even the diction, the choice of words reflect the social class, reflect the background, reflect the educational background, and reflect where from which city are you from, even the place. Okay, so and we're not that tolerant with that, even although sometimes it's the correct use of Arabic, but sometimes we have this attitude towards the choice of words that we are not familiar with, although it might be the correct form of the Arabic language. But it's not the most commonly used with high standard social class.
I think when you talk about lexical choices, I think it's actually, it should count towards the language variety sometimes. That's my own thought anyway, because I think is that, okay, if you use a whole different set of vocabularies in your speech, then that's another language variety, but I'm not sure if it can be counted that way, but that's how I would personally perceive it, if it makes sense. And some people will speak like as if they were like a writer or something. So that's just so cool. I think it reflects the social classes as well. For example, in English, I think people tend to say supper if that's my perception anyway. They say supper if they're in a higher class, but they say dinner if that's how it's perceived. Well, I mean, that's how I perceive it, I think, personally. But because I think it's a nicer word to use. But
although it's a meal that is eaten in different timing, right?
Oh yeah, true. But it's different time, but then it's just like it sounds posher. I think supper, because it's related to the sound anyway, because it's the R sound. It's my supper. That sounds great to me. But okay, and I can see. Okay, dinner. You've got your hand up.
I actually have a certain thought about language attitudes in Egypt here. So if we talk about attitudes towards language variation, okay, I mean in language variation in Arabic itself. So if you get to compare between the accent of the people in Upper Egypt and in Cairo or Alexandria, we get to see that there is a huge difference, okay? And there is a kind of pride and dignity in using this accent for the people of Upper Egypt, which is called Saidi, okay? So if I give you an example, the level of pronouncing words, like if we have the word boy, which is walad in Fusha, okay, or in modern standard Arabic, it's walad, okay. We tend to see that the people in Upper Egypt say wad. Wad is like walad or a boy, okay. So there is a difference. Okay, and I also have another example of the dots, al-balah, which we eat for the breakfast in Ramadan. Okay, if it's tough, we say it's neshifa. I mean, it's really hard to be swollen or to be eaten. Okay, in Upper Egypt, they say what? They say magrash. Okay, which is somehow different. So this is the semantic level of the language variety. But at the end of the day, we get to see the difference in language itself. Okay, and these are the two examples I wanted to reflect, to comment on the language attitude in just one language, which is Arabic. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for the example there. That's quite interesting. Yeah, I mean, the word sounds really different, I think. But yeah, it's interesting to know that. Thank you for the example.
May I ask a question before we start?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. It's Yomna here. So I just want to ask, is there like a parameter or like a specific measurement of how we can measure the attitudes towards language? Because I know that language attitudes and attitudes towards language and so on is like a very broad topic, and it's a very broad area. So is there like any parameter or measurement to do so?
Well, yeah. The next part of the next part is going to be about how we measure language attitudes. And yeah, it's a very vague concept. And basically, we didn't talk about how we measure it at the very beginning. So, but then we're going to get back to it now, if it makes sense. Okay. Yeah. So before the break, we talked about what language attitudes were, and the question now is how we find them. And traditionally, there are three main approaches to the empirical study of attitudes: the societal treatment approach, the direct approach, and the indirect approach. The societal treatment approach does not involve respondents' participation, and examples can include observations, review of government policy or media content. Because of the fact that it does not involve participation of respondents, it tends to be a less popular method of research on language attitudes. And then second, we have got the direct approach, which mainly involves like self-report by respondents regarding their attitudes. And the use of surveys is amongst the most popular direct methods to find out respondents' attitudes. However, because response biases can be an issue when this approach is used to measure attitudes, because it is possible that respondents may provide a certain answer because they believe such a response would match their identity. So, so the responses can somehow be biased because the respondents chose a certain answer not because it's actually what they think, but it's that they believe they should put on such an answer. And the third approach is the indirect approach, which is a measurement of attitudes in which participants are unaware of what's being measured. This is pretty much the most popular indirect method used in finding language attitudes. And the most common one, or the most well-known method in the indirect approach is the match-guise test, which was created and first used in the 1960s to determine the language attitudes of bilinguals in Canada, in English and French, towards English and French in Canada. The match-guise technique involves participants being asked to evaluate the personal qualities of speakers in the recordings without knowing any information about the speakers in advance. So, so they just listen to the recording, but they don't know who the speakers are. But then they have to evaluate the personal qualities based on the perception, based on the recordings, based on the recordings themselves. That's why the answers should theoretically be based purely on the languages or language varieties, rather than the stereotypes prevalent in the community. So in other words, the judgments should just be language related, but it should not be it shouldn't be related to the other thoughts, but just the language only, if it makes sense. Yeah. What do you think about these three approaches? Which one do you think is the best? Any idea, any thoughts? Or is everyone clear about these three approaches? So the first one is, it doesn't involve any participants. It doesn't involve any participation. So observation, review of governmental policy. The second one is the direct approach, like survey, in which the respondents would have to self-report their attitudes towards the language. third one, indirect approach, in which the participants are unaware of what's being measured. Yeah. Which one do you think makes more sense?
To be honest, I think they all fill in the gaps of each other.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe that language is best assessed or evaluated through indirect approach, because when people, they are assessed or evaluated, they start becoming very fixed in how they behave or whatever they say. It's not pretty much that authentic. So I do believe the best of them, maybe in my opinion, is the indirect approach, but I think the other two approaches might fill in the gaps if we did not understand certain points in our indirect assessment. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, that's I totally agree, because that's the reason why I'm using the indirect method in my own research as well. So I'm using the technique that I introduced, match guide technique. So I had 10 speakers recording 10 recordings, and in English, Cantonese, and Mandarin. And I asked the respondents to evaluate the personal qualities purely based on the recordings. And it's actually not that easy to set up, but then it's not too difficult either. So, and I think it would give the best the most authentic results, because as you said, people are aware of what they write if they know what's being measured. But if they're not sure and they just hear the recording and just fill in the personal qualities, maybe they don't know what they're
exactly.
So it would be more genuine, I think. So
yes.
So that's why I chose it, and I'm glad that you agree with it. Yeah. Any other thoughts on this?
Yes, I have a question. I agree with Dina and with you that the third approach is the best one, because it overcomes the paradox of them knowing that they are being measured. So they will adjust how they are going to respond. So the third option is the safest one. But I want to ask, after you get, for example, you make a questionnaire about, you let them hear the recordings and then you ask them about it, or is it a questionnaire?
It's supposed to be a questionnaire. So so they listen to the recording, and then they've got like a set of questions that they fill in. But for my own one, because I've got some sort of technical issue, so I have to. So I'll fill in the form for them, but then I'll have a call with them. I mean, I'll send them the recording, and I'll ask them the question one by one. So, how friendly do you think this person is, for example?
And you give them a scale.
Yeah.
Right?
Like an adjective, like friendly. How from 1 to 10, how friendly do you think this person is after hearing the recording? And there are a few like adjectives, like there are 12 personal qualities for each recording or each speaker, if it makes sense.
Okay, so can instead of a questionnaire, can it be, for example, you ask them about their opinion in general and then analyze the language they're using in their response to what they've heard?
That would work, I think, but then it would be slightly different than the traditional methods. Yeah, it might be a little bit more vague, but then you can still do, perhaps it would be more qualitative in nature in this way, I think.
Yes.
As opposed to quantitative, yeah. But I think it would work, I think.
I'm actually interested in analyzing how they would use the language in response to what, I mean, if we can detect their attitude from the language.
Yeah. So, yes, okay. But if you don't use the questionnaire, then it might turn out to be more qualitative, but then it's fine. I think it's not going to be a problem, but I haven't done it before yet. But yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I've seen Omama hands up.
Yes. Yes. Hello, Doctor. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I'd like to say something about the indirect approach. I don't know if it's related to the implied meaning in a certain message, because sometimes the speaker doesn't want to to talk about his or her psychological state directly. So he wants to he or she wants to reflect his psychological state or emotional or mental state indirectly. So he reflects these states in an indirect way through his or her choice of words, his or her style. So that's it. That's what I want to say about the indirect approach.
Yeah, because that I think that's the good thing about it, is that when they're unaware of what is being measured or what's being what sort of answers we are collecting, then perhaps the answers they give would be more genuine to what they actually believe in. So I think that's the main point of the indirect method, I think. Yeah. Any other comment?
Yes.
Dina, yeah.
Yeah, I just have a question concerning the third approach, the indirect.
Yeah.
Do you think that we can add some kind of observations or interviewing people in addition to having questionnaires to just to test their language attitudes, or just we depend on the questionnaires and the scaling method and that's it? Why I'm asking this question? Because we can have some kind of real life situations where we practice the language, and then we can detect their emotions, feelings, beliefs about this language in different contexts. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I think traditionally the Match-Guys test is a questionnaire. Yeah. But then, of course, even for my own research, I'm going to have a follow-up interview as well to find out the reasons behind such responses or such attitudes towards certain languages. Yeah, so I think it doesn't purely have to be just the indirect method on its own, or just the Match-Guys test on its own. You can have it with something else, like an interview to follow up with the responses, and you probably get more data to analyze in that way. Does it answer your question? No?
Oh yeah, I got you. So we can make a combination of each and everything.
Yeah. I think that's the that would be.
So
yes.
have you tried any of these things in your PhD project?
I'm using I'm combining a questionnaire, a Match-Guys test, and interview. So I've got 3 things. So that's why
that's
I'm
really
just
interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for my own research, I've got the most respondents for the questionnaire. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, this would end up adding to your results, or how things should be figured out.
Well, so I use the questionnaire to find out the quantitative data that I want, and for the Match-Guys test, because I can't really do too many. So I use it to combine it. Well, for the thoughts right now, I will use it to combine it with the interview to make it like a more like a qualitative sort of analysis, I think. Yeah. So to answer different research questions, if it makes sense
Thank
to you.
Hayes.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. Any other thoughts or ideas? Yeah.
Yes, please. Is the Match-Guys test? Is it a ready-made test, or do you compile the question that you want to ask, or is it? Can you change any question concerning regarding the society or what? Because I've never heard about this test before, actually.
Well, traditionally, the first time it was used, the questions involved like personal qualities, like adjectives. So for example, it asks you based on the recording, how friendly do you think the person is or the speaker is? How successful he is, for example, and that's the traditional questions they would ask. Whether you can change the questions, it might be a different method, but perhaps it can still work. But it depends on your research question and what you're trying to answer, I think. But yeah, I think it depends more on what you're trying to answer in your research. So yeah, does it answer your question or?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, no worries. It's a little bit brief because it's the first time I'm using it as well, so hopefully it's fine. Any other thoughts or going ahead with the next section? Okay, so now we talk a little bit about identity, because the class today is about like identity and language attitudes. So identity, as Norton defined, is how a person understands his or her relationships to the world. In different contexts, one can be defined in various ways in terms of identities, such as gender, occupation, and ethnicity. However, identity is a multi-dimensional and complex concept and is therefore difficult to define. Regarding the complex nature of identity, scholars generally agree that the concept of identity can be divided into two categories: social and personal identity. And Fearon suggests that a personal identity is a set of attributes, beliefs, desires, or principles of action that a person thinks distinguishes her in socially relevant ways. A social identity is, on the other hand, an identity which denotes the membership of a social group, such as nationality. Today, we'll go slightly deep into the idea of social identity through the social identity theory. Okay. The social identity was first conceptualized in 1972 by Tajfel. This theory can be seen as an attempt to explain the intergroup behaviors with the assumption that group membership is a crucial part of a person, describing social identity as a part of an individual's self-concept, which derives from his knowledge to his membership of a social group together with this emotional significance attached to that group. In other words, the theory proposes that one's identity is derived from social groups, and the group can be seen as a collection of individuals who perceive themselves to be members of the same social category. And it aims to explain how a social identity is formed from group membership. So this theory, it's basically about how we create, or how a social identity is created. And it's the concept of categorization is central to the theory. And it involves two categorization, the social categorization and the self-categorization. And the social categorization is the process by which people categorize others into different social groups, such as gender and ethnicity, in order to enhance their understanding of the social world. During this process, people are not seen as individuals, but instead group members who share the similar category prototypes, which are the sets of attributes shared within the social group. And the prototypes can then be seen as the norms of the social groups. In the process, people categorize themselves and others into differentiated groups by stereotyping group features to individuals and generalizing the individual features to the group. And then that is how the stereotype or non-consistent expectations regarding people's attitudes and conduct is formed. Does it make sense, or any question, or is it because it might be a little bit abstract just by hearing that. Anyone has any question? Or
yes, I need just to make sure about the last thing you mentioned.
Yeah.
You said that we can generate norms.
Yeah.
Yeah, based on the people's attitudes in language?
Yeah.
I mean, based on the model that you explained earlier, for example, the cognitive, emotional, and I don't remember the last element. But anyways, I need just to make sure that we can be like a norm setter in this stage.
I think the
norm setter based on people's attitudes.
Yeah.
In a language. Yes, is that right?
Yeah. So attitudes can be a norm because yeah. Can you hear me clearly? Or yeah. Yeah. So for this social categorization process, people. So according to the theory, people view different people in terms of different social groups, and they generate they categorize them in terms of the common features they have. And the common features can be different things. It can be gender, occupation, interests, or even attitudes can work as well. But it's just a process in which
Yes.
Yeah.
So my question was, or it's not a question. I just need to make sure that I got things right. Now I have the emotional, cognitive, beliefs, components, behavioral responses towards the language. Yes. So I can like categorize all these things, or I can divide them into certain norms. I can set the norm of experience, the norm of gender, the norm of blah blah blah. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's
so
just
I may place myself in at the place of a norm setter, or I set the guidelines for the social norms about language attitudes. Yes.
Yeah, it's basically your thought, because it's just you. That's why you categorize the social world according to how you think and whether you fit into it. That's the main idea of this process. So you set the guideline. Okay, so why is it a group? So you think about it. So you set out the guideline for it, or the norms that the group has. Yeah. So basically, that's the idea of this. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And then after that, okay.
Thanks, Hayes. Anyway.
No worries. Hope it answered your question, because it's.
Yes, I just need to make things right.
Yeah.
I got it right.
Yeah, the first time I read about it was like a little bit confusing as well. Yeah, but so after social categorization, that then comes the self-categorization. It is sort of an extension of social identity theory, and it investigates the ways in which individuals transform their behaviors and beliefs to conform to the norms of the social group they categorize themselves into. So in social categorization, you categorize other people, but then self-categorization, you categorize yourself to fit into the to make yourself into, or to fit yourself into the social group that you think you should be in. And during the self-categorization, depersonalization takes place, and depersonalization is the process where people come to see themselves more as the interchangeable exemplars of a social categories. And it means that individuals self-stereotype and self-configure in order to be closer to the defining attributes of the category or prototypes, to the category prototypes of the social group they want to be in. And therefore, self-categorization through depersonalization is a crucial step for the creation of a social identity. And Hogg and Smith proposed that the cognitive process of self-categorization and depersonalization explain how people internalize group attributes and behave in line with the group norms. Because the process show the way in which people perceive and adopt the group prototypical attributes, including attitudes, as their own. And they assert that attitudes are depersonalized in a self-categorization process so that individuals conform to the in-group prototypes. And therefore, one's attitudes undergo changes with reference to his or her social identity as well. Any question about this so far? Because it might be a little bit vague again. I'm not sure. Is everyone clear about it? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I do have a question here.
Yep.
I just need to know, how do, like, when we talk about attitudes and self-categorization and categorization in general, how do we like avoid the trap of being biased?
It's very easy to be biased, but what I think is that it's just a theory that explains how people see the world as different social groups and make themselves fit into it. I would say it's quite subjective, actually, because people are subjective anyway, I think, to a certain extent. I mean, most people. But then, yeah, so it's not really a thing that can be solved being biased, but it's just this theory is just a theory that explains how we create the social identity that we feel like we fit in, if it makes sense.
Yeah, but I mean like it's really hard. Like there's nothing solid or tangible that we could again like have a specific or like a very accurate measurement for self-categorization or measuring the language attitudes in general, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's why I think if there is a research on this, I don't think this should be done quantitatively. You have to go through different cases and analyze case by case. I think that would give you the best sort of answer.
I guess so. I guess this, in this case, the case studies and the qualitative method of research would be more accurate, because this is something that cannot be generalized as far as I understand.
Yeah, because sometimes, yeah, if you give out a survey asking about like identities, like social identities, for example, asking respondents, and then you just need to understand the reason behind they choose a certain answer, because as you said, it can be really biased. So instead of just getting the numbers right, it's better to get the content right. I think that's the best. I think that that's why I think qualitative analysis would be the most suitable to find out the link between social identity and attitudes, or language attitudes. Does it answer your question, or?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
There is. Okay. Okay. So Hogg and Smith conceptualized attitudes in terms of their group normative properties and dynamics, and so they suggest that attitudes can be one of the group norms in a social group. It can be viewed as a group norm in a social group, and this proposition between social identity theory and attitudes actually was used and tested in one of the researchers, Iano's research on language attitudes in Catalonia in relation to different variables, including how respondents self-identify themselves, in which it was concluded that self-identification with Catalonia predicted attitudes towards Catalan, that self-identification with Spain is negatively related to the attitudes towards Catalan, and that the results regarding the link between language attitudes and self-identification mirror those regarding the link between self-identification and language uses. These findings are in line with Hogg and Smith's proposition that social identity and attitudes are closely related, with attitudes functioning as a normative attributes of a social group, which in turn shape the social identity of people. So this is the sort of theoretical framework I have for my research, and that's why the hypothesis that I've got for my research is that positive attitudes towards Cantonese would predict a self-identification as a Hong Kong person, and a positive attitudes towards Mandarin would predict a self-identification of Chinese instead. Yeah. Any other examples do you have any thoughts about, or have you seen any research about these, like using this method, or any related research about attitudes and identity that you can maybe share? Yeah. Or any questions about this? Yeah. Any questions? Or any thoughts, comment? If there is no question, then we can go on to the bit of discussion session then. Or yeah.
Just have about 5 more minutes.
Yeah. Okay. If we've got 5 more minutes, yeah. We can go to the little bit of like the discussion session, and I've prepared a few questions for discussion. But then, yeah. So I've got 3 questions, and we've got like 5 minutes left, and we can discuss all of them. I mean, you can choose which one you want to talk about. In a globalized world where English is a global language, what are the attitudes towards English in the area you live in? Has the rise of English somehow affected your sense of belonging or perception of your identity? And are there any thoughts about language attitudes and identity that you want to bring up? Yeah. Any thoughts or comments?
I would like to share something about the first question.
Yep, the first
attitudes,
question.
Towards English in my area where I live in. Well, I mainly live in Alexandria in Egypt, okay? So if we talk about English as a second language in schools, especially in private sector schools, we get to see the parents or the students, they ask about English as 2 different Englishes. So they ask teachers, is this American English or British English? So they have a certain attitude towards English itself as a subject. And I myself, I tend to answer the question. I see that it's not about is it American or British English that you should learn, but you should learn the English properly as a language. So we have certain attitude towards English where the preference goes for the American English.
Yeah, American English is somehow the norm in Hong Kong as well. I don't know why, but just but I agree with you. Apart from trying to learn English in a certain accent or a certain variety, it's better to use it correctly, and I think that should be the
and they have
that should be the goal.
This preference, but they still don't know about the specification of the language. They do not know a broad idea or a general idea about how they should learn the American English. They eager to learn. Okay.
Yeah, the eager to learn. Yeah, I remember going to. I was in the first year I was in Scotland. I was speaking to my flatmate who was from England, and I was like, "Oh, your accent is so cool. How do I learn it?" And then I was like, "It's not about how you speak; it's about what you speak."
Exactly.
So I think that's so that, yeah. But in Hong Kong, it's the same. People tend to just try to roll their R sound to try to sound more American. But they don't use, some of the time they don't even use the correct grammar or the correct words as well. Yeah, so I agree that correct English. In the languages, I think it's the main idea of a language is to be able to communicate with others. So
yes, it's all about communication at the end of the day, because I myself, I'm not going to ask you this question. Is it American English or British English or Irish English? It's about communication as far as we can understand each other.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah, and yeah, Doris, any other thoughts or ideas?
Yes, I do actually agree with Dina, because I do believe people start acting and behaving differently. I'm sorry, speaking Arabic, differently according to whether they belong to the American English speakers or the British English speakers. Sometimes I deal with students and I tell them that they did a couple of mistakes wrong in, let's say, in their essay. They start acting, how so? I came from an American diploma school. While their sentence structure is totally ruined. So how come you're acting? So they just take it as if I belong to the American diploma or the IG system, whatever it is. So I do believe, and yes, it's according, people deal with English as if it's a prestigious language. You speak English and your accent is really good, then you're definitely someone who had this amazing education and that you belong to a high level standard, living standards. While sometimes it's not actually true. Some people are hard workers and they actually love the language and they're working on themselves. That's as simple as that. But yeah, I do agree with Dina. People just start taking, they just want to belong, whether I'm an American English speaker or a British English speaker. It's this or that. They don't look at it as, well, hello, you're losing your identity. How about speaking Egyptian English language?
Yeah, that. Yeah,
maybe that's a little bit as well relevant to the language, attitude, and identity at the beginning when you were talking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, because I think that one of the reasons why they try to learn so-called, for example, American accent or British accent is that, well, either they really, really like the sound of it, or they just want to be sort of like, it's more like a social identity thing that they want to depersonalize themselves and just fit into the group norm of the English, of the American English, for example.
And it all depends on how people will react. If you belong to the American English speakers, then maybe you'll be treated differently than someone who's actually speaking, just with the Egyptian accent. So maybe you'll be like respected more. I don't know, but I think that's how it usually works.
Yes. I think it's more about social.
It offers.
Yeah, social identity. Yeah, it's always about that.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks for your thought. Oh no, we have one. Enough time.
I think Yomna has her
Yomna?
hand up. So, and if Weston wants to say anything, and then we can wrap it up.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, let Yomna speak first. Okay, it's okay.
Yeah, I was actually gonna talk about the identity and how language can affect the identity of the young people specifically. So the teenagers, for example, they are so proud that they can speak proper English, and they are proud that they speak broken Arabic. They are even proud that they understand the proverbs and idioms in English, and they don't understand a single expression in Arabic or any proverb from our heritage. So this is how language can affect the identity. This is the real problem.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same sort of in Hong Kong as well. Because people are more proud of being able to speak English in a certain accent, but when it comes to Chinese, young people now, they don't seem to care that much. Yeah, they don't really mind not knowing certain words in Chinese or in Cantonese or Mandarin, but they just do code switching. That's why I think code switching is more common nowadays, because sometimes they don't know the words in their mother tongue in the first language.
Code mixing all the time. It happens all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So but yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for your thought. Yeah. Any others or?
Yeah, I wanted to comment very quickly. You actually said what I wanted to say, but to comment on what both Dinas said, that people, well, speaking good English means that you come from a social background that is of high standard and so on. And people here tend to think of English as a prestigious language. So yeah, I just wanted to add to what they were saying, nothing new. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, thank you for your thoughts.
And of course, we should focus on communication.
Oh yeah, focus on communication.
Yeah, no proper English, and I mean the prescriptive approach is outdated, and we should be, especially in a global world right now, and we call it now global Englishes and so on. So we have to focus on how we communicate with each other. So yeah.
I see. Yeah. Communication is always the key in a language anyway. I think it's not about how, I mean, it shouldn't really be about like just social identity, but also about how you, how you communicate, and whether the language, the main function of languages is being used, if it makes sense. Yeah. Thank you for your thought. And I saw one comment from the chat. Several times I try to modern research. Yeah, moreover, attitudes to a certain accent. Yeah, I wanted to use verbal. VG. Is that Northern? Is that Northern? Who? Yeah. I'm really interested in the topic of Mashkai's test. Well, we're running out of time, right?
I think, yeah, but
yeah.
we can maybe, we've got the Moodle classroom, so Hayes can upload some materials or information maybe.
Yeah.
Some examples of the Match Guys test, and we'll wrap it up. I really enjoyed that